Welcome to Vital MTB's 2021 Enduro Test Sessions. We knew just where to test these bikes, Reno, Nevada. Surrounded by rugged mountains, strewn with rocky trails, we knew the biggest little city would be the perfect proving grounds for our bikes. Sky Tavern Bike Park is a nonprofit that operates on city land and is free for the public to ride. Their expanding trail network includes an adaptive green trail all the way to hard-hitting black diamond runs. From heavy downhills to steep, challenging climbs, the Sierras threw it all at our test bikes. In this video, we will be discussing the all-new Pivot Firebird. Hang tight, because we also have an update since our initial test session review. After the launch of the Switchblade model, Pivot has been working through the line, updating models to the new vertical shock layout and revised geometry. The Firebird is the latest to get the revision, and Pivot did not hold any punches here. Sporting a 468mm reach, the Pivot Firebird has the longest front center on our test. To keep the overall length in check, the chainstay is 434mm. Riders will want to check the geometry chart for their specific size, as these numbers do look different. Pivot is running size-specific chainstay lengths with the Firebird. There's also a 64-degree head angle, which makes a total wheelbase of 1239mm. With 165mm of coil-sprung rear travel and both ends of the bike adorned by Fox factory suspension, the Firebird is properly equipped for serious hits. Overall, the build kit is ready for action. 4-piston Shimano XT brakes with 203mm rotors indicate this is a bike built for speed. Our test bike had a 175mm Fox transfer dropper seat post. With plenty of post insertion, we were big fans of this post performance and fit. Cheers to Pivot for putting a long dropper on our medium. All the pieces are in place for the Firebird to be a top performer. However, our testers were a bit split over the Firebird's trail manners. With our teams somewhat divided, where would we put the Firebird overall?
Its strengths, definitely the flatter, more pumpy type of terrain. I think it jumps well, it pumps well, but in terms of weaknesses, I could not keep this thing on a line in the steep, rocky stuff. Felt like it just kept getting deflected all over the place. So again, I think the jury's a little bit out. I think it's fair to say, like I said, a little more time on this bike, I might have done a little better with it.
What we kind of figured out as a team later on was a lot of the struggle that we were experiencing on the really steep terrain, where you're having to kind of navigate and work your way through. It's not necessarily high speed, but you're on the brakes and having to go through like these really chunky pieces. The bike does have a tendency to like start to push you forward. So throwing a tape measure on the bike, what we found was the 50mm stem and 760 bars were two outliers amongst our group. The narrowest bars on any other bike were 770s, and certainly the narrowest that any of us would ever run is 770. So the 760s did put us in a little weaker riding position than what we feel the Firebird deserves. And that 50mm stem became really apparent in like certain bits of terrain where you want to drop your back wheel and kind of do a little power manual through something. There's a weird cantilever feeling that you just don't get with a 35 or 40mm stem. And so those were two areas that really hindered the Firebird's performance overall. I am a little bit alone in the fact that I felt like it danced around just fine. I liked the way that it hit jumps, especially kind of some of the more natural trail rhythms we were getting into. I felt really at ease with the bike.
If you're in the bike park, you like flow trails, or you're riding stuff that isn't so steep and is flowy, I think it would be a great bike for that.
I also felt like, especially with that DW link, like when you got on the pedals or when you were pedaling it was really responsive to pedaling. So someone that wants to ride, steep technical terrain, do some really aggressive riding, but could also, pedal this bike well.
Hang on. This is not the end of our Firebird review. After examining our testers' feedback and some of the peculiarities with the Firebird, We knew this test couldn't be over. We reached out to Pivot and asked for a new bar and stem. Happily, they obliged. Additionally, we had a conversation with Pivot about suspension setup and tuning, just to make sure we were hitting the mark. Vital has been testing bikes for over a decade, but we stay on top of our game by being thorough. With our issues addressed, we sent the Firebird back to Reno to be tested on the same terrain by one of our test session riders, former professional racer Casey Kaufman. Let's break down what changed and what did not. To start, there was the bar and stem. After taking receipt of our new 800mm bar and 35mm stem, we noticed something off with the original bars. Despite measuring out to 760mm, they were cut on Pivot's 770mm cut line. When we lined them up to Pivot's 800mm bar, we could see the measuring lines were 10mm off. Comparing the Pivot bars to other brands revealed the same consistency. The original bars on our Firebird were mislabeled. Typically, an unfortunate mistake like this would be pretty minor. However, when going between 6 different bikes, having one set of bars be particularly narrower can make it stand out, causing riders to feel more cramped than they actually are. Getting the shorter 35mm stem proved fruitful, because in addition to having the longest stem in our test, the Pivot also had the longest reach, creating a front end that was far longer than any of the other 5 bikes.
Going to the shorter stem and full width bar certainly helped, but really, I mean, the back end still just, it stands up on successive hits. So I felt like I got along better with it this time, certainly because of the bar and stem, that's part of it, but also I think I had more time to like reflect on the test. And I mean, you just have to really ride this bike on the back. Keep your weight on the back to keep the back end down. You know, some bikes, you know, especially that Orbea, most of us got on and we're immediately like, oh, I'm at home. I know exactly what this thing's going to do. You know, some bikes have a learning curve. Some of the learning curves are long or steep or however you want to describe it. Some of them have a really small, quick adaptability. So I think for sure more time on the bike, you would get more used to it, but or you know, adapt your style to the bike. But I think testing a bike, picking a bike should be more about finding a bike that fits your style, not changing your style to fit the bike you have.
Despite Vital's critique in this one area, the Firebird had a ton of great stuff going for it.
I think the bike is super fun in a lot of what probably most people ride. You know, even going back to the test, it was among the best, the fastest, the most fun in the moderate cruiser, even higher speed, just not rough, not super rough, not steep. That's where it becomes a little bit of a handful to keep in shape.
More than anything, the suspension tuning on our Firebird was a point of concern. We discussed setup with Pivot and dove deeper into how they feel their bikes should be set up. Typically, they advise riders run their forks softer than what is recommended on the Fox setup guide. They did share that if a rider is very aggressive and riding very steep terrain, a stiffer setup is okay. This was good news, since Vital was already running the Fox 38 at the recommended Fox setting, already stiffer than Pivot's recommendation. Even still, Vital felt the fork may have been too soft and gave it another crack.
Yeah, I mean, we ran the same settings, especially fork settings on every bike, because a fork is pretty much independent of the bike, right? So we ran Fox recommended settings, same pressure. I ran 95 in this thing, which is a little high for my weight, according to Fox's recommended settings. Ran 92 in the Orbea, so it's just almost the same. Super close, both with a lot of tokens. But I think running this fork a little stiff would help, at least for my style, keep me off of the front and, you know, therefore over the back to kind of cover up what I would call kind of the shortcomings that I felt.
Pivot's Firebird is a terrific bike. We love the parts spec on it, and we found it to be lightning quick in most riding scenarios.
I think it's for people who like their home trails aren't super steep, gnarly, rocky, you know, just like full on. You know, somebody who needs or wants the extra suspension for when they need it. And maybe, you know, somebody who has that kind of off the back riding style. It pedals well, it pumps well. It's great in the smooth to moderate stuff. It's just gets a little out of sorts when it gets really steep and like successive hit rock garden kind of stuff.
That is all for Vital's review redo of the Pivot Firebird. A big thanks to Pivot for letting us dig deeper with this orange rocket. Make sure to check out the full review with more in-depth analysis on vitalmtb.com. If you want to know more about what the Washoe Valley has to offer, head to visitrenotahoe.com. And until next time, go ride your bike.